Grief is a very strong emotion which causes one to become angry, frustrated, hopeless, and can be responsible for people wanting to blame something or someone for the loss. Grief isn't the same for everyone. It hits differently, which causes people to respond and to react differently. Some start the process of grief immediately, while others take just a little bit longer. And so to the point of, from a point, things have to kind of fall into place when we're dealing with grief. And so I want to remind you or to inform you that I'm not a counselor. That's not my profession. But today I speak to you from personal experience. I have an experience of what grief is. And so that's what I will share to you on today. It has been said that some losses are more easier to recognize and to receive, while others are harder to comprehend and to even understand. It's the sudden losses. It's the traumatic losses. It's the unprepared ones, the ones that we can't wrap our mind around. He comes to steal, kill, and to destroy. And so we can't afford to help him in being successful in our grieving process. Here's some important things to note about grief. Grief doesn't go away. You have to learn to live with grief. And Andy Hefton, one who has studied this, she puts it quite like this. Some grief marks us for a lifetime, while some grief is seasonal. We manage to move through it. She says grief doesn't evaporate. And so don't act like it's going to just go away. We must deal with it. It's important to know that if you grieve something as a child, listen to this. If you grieve something as a child and if you don't deal with it now, you best to believe it's going to resurface and you're going to deal with it at the manner you started the grieving process. So it's important to grieve with it, to grieve it. Beware that it can look different. This is healthy. So when it comes back up, sometimes if you grieved it as a child and when it comes back up, maybe it will resurface as a different type of grieving process. Maybe you missed your father because it was your father that passed away when you were 2 or 3 years old. And so when you are married and you're 25 or you're 30 years old, now maybe you're grieving the fact that now you have a newborn child, and because you're grieving the fact that you didn't have your father there and you're uncertain of how you're going to help your child to grieve through it. And I was just sharing with my progression of the process. So there's 3 things I want to share as we grieve through things. Relationship is important. One must know Jesus as Lord and Savior. The more you spend time with him, the more you will know about him. It's in the moments of grief that you were more likely to see a side of God that you've never seen before. I experienced that. Matthew 22:37 says, love God with everything in you, your heart, mind, and soul. He loved us so much that he gave us his everything. He gave us Jesus. And the second thing is responsibility is key. As a believer, it's our response to God to say, God, I need you. That's why the shirt, Dear Grace, is over there, because Dear Grace, I need you. I need you. There was a moment in my life, I've loved God. I've served God for years and years, but in that moment, when my son was taken away from here, God, I need you. It's like all Christian principles went out of the window, so to speak. God, I need you. And so the natural response is to draw up and stay closed up. But the Bible tells us that we need to draw closer to God. We need to get closer to him, not farther away. The third thing as it relates to we need to refocus is necessary. Death will catch us off guard. And even when we're prepared, it's inevitable. It catches us off guard. You can prepare all you want, but when it happens and it becomes real, it takes us to a place that we don't want to go to. I remember having this revelation. I was looking up on Facebook, and every time I would look, I would see people posting things about death. And I would say, oh my God, like, what's the deal? Like, don't they know that there is another way, that you don't have to, like, why are you going to social media? Like, that's not the answer. And so it started to grieve me that that's where everyone was going to, all, so to speak, looking for help. So December around Christmas, my husband and I, We took a vacation. Don't know why I did this, because he had some sort of surgery and he couldn't walk. So here I am. We're at Universal Studios and I am pushing him in a wheelchair as we prepare. And so nevertheless, I said yes. And instantly when I gave God my yes, God says, to whom much is given, much is required. And so I immediately thought in that moment, okay, so I'm on vacation. I've got to somehow fit in, studying and receiving from God. When we return back on Friday, the next day we have a catering that we have to prepare for. So that's what I'm thinking. So we're enjoying ourselves. We're shopping like I love to do, but I'm still, God, what are you saying? What are you speaking? And so we get home Friday, we're preparing for the catering. We go on Saturday and we prepare for the catering, and I'm still thinking about the word that God had given me. My position is victory. And so we go to the catering, we come home, I'm relaxing, getting prepared for the word on Sunday. And God and I are having this conversation, and God says, I'm preparing you for something greater. And I'm like, God, you know what? You are too funny. And so I'm like, you know what? Get out of the tub. That's my happy place. Get out of the tub, go to bed so that you can get up in the morning. I get in the bed and the phone rings, and it's my son's wife, and she is screaming. And I'm like, what are you saying? What are you saying? And she says, I got a call that says Durarius has been shot. He's dead. And I'm like, no, tell me, repeat that again. And I hang up the phone, and my husband said, what? And I said, I think she said someone called her and said Durarius has been shot and he's dead. And I said, no, let me call her. I call her back. I said, can you tell me everything you just said? Say it again so I can make certain that I understood you. She says, someone called. She's still crying. So I said, okay, so I understand this. And I'm like, okay, start calling. Because this can't be. Not the first hospital we get to, he was there. He was not dead, but he was fighting for his life. They wouldn't tell us anything because they didn't know who did it. And so we wait, and it was about 4 o'clock in the morning. They'd done surgery. They wouldn't allow me to see him because they didn't know who did what. My friend said, Pam, have you spoke with Pastor? I'm like, no. She said, you have to preach tomorrow, right? And I said, yes. She said, what are you going to do? Instantly, to whom much is given, much is required. And I said, I have to go. She said, are you sure? And her husband said, I couldn't do it. And I said, you know what? God has called me for something bigger than this moment. So I'm going. We left the hospital at 5 o'clock in the morning, headed back to Ponchatoula. They wouldn't allow us to see him. So I said, I could sit here and not know what to do, or I can go back and do what God has called me to do. I go back. I said, I'm not telling not one person what has happened. I don't need their emotions. I need to stay focused because God has called me to do something bigger than myself. There were very few people that knew. I told them and I left. Like I would say it and I would move on. I preached. I had my bag packed because in my mind, when I'm done, I'm headed back to the hospital. I preached. My bag was in the car and I went back to the hospital for 7 days. It was like a movie that my son fought for his life. A prayer CD that's back there on the table that God allowed me to birth. We played it day in and day out. I believed God for a miracle. I believe it. I can vision now my pastor standing on the side rails of the bed, hovering over him, praying life into him. What happens when you believe God for something and it still doesn't manifest? Do you quit believing God? Friends, they met me at my hotel. They came to get me because it was time to face reality, to sign papers and say, if it came to it, do you want us to resuscitate him? The blessing was this, that my daughter and my husband had already talked about what we wanted to happen. We knew my son would not want his life to be drug out. We knew he would not want to be one that is lifeless. So we made the decision before we became too emotional, and we agreed that when the time would come, we were in agreement and say we would release him.